Welcome to What's Working. Thank you for joining us on this week's show. Hopefully got some content here that's going to make you scratch your head, rub your chin, all that kind of stuff. It's somewhat controversial and can't wait to get into it. I'll tell you about our guest in a moment. So you're listening to What's Working. If you're new to this, we study workplace, workforce, marketplace trends. I find guests that can talk about the trends in such a way that will teach us what's going on out there. And best case scenario, they teach us something about the trends that we can apply to our own business. I want, at the end of your time in this show, whether you listen to the whole thing or just a snippet, I want you to come away and say, that's good stuff. I can use that somehow. That's the goal. That's the line of questioning I take with each of my guests is how is what they're going to say going to benefit my listeners in some way or another. And after the break, I'm going to have Connor Lokar on. Connor is an economist. He's out of New Hampshire. I've seen him present 4 times now, maybe 5 times. He's really good. And the last time I saw him in May, he said, I'm going to ask him to make sure I'm not misquoting him. We are in a recession. If it weren't for government spending, which is going crazy, we're in a recession. I had lunch with a couple of friends of mine who are a part of an engineering firm, and they specialize in roads and bridges, and they're in the infrastructure around roadways. And they do other things, but those were the 2 guys that I was with. And they said, man, these are the best years. They're the best years ever for engineering firms and road building companies, et cetera, because of the extraordinary government spending going on the infrastructure. And one could say, that's good. We need that spending. One could say it's false money. We have national money problems as it is, the debt, the deficit, et cetera. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. I think there are arguments both ways that can be made. But nevertheless, they say the government spending has propelled them to a new level of success and profit within their organization than they've ever seen before. And they do these projects all over the Southeast. Connor's going to talk to us about that. He's going to give us a read on the economy. And my hope is in the final segment of the show, our show is a 5-segment job. This is segment 1. Segments 2, 3, and 4 is with the guest. Segment 5 is my review of the show. My hope is in segment 4, I can get Connor to talk a little bit about what his company predicts going to happen in the year 2030-ish. And it is some dire stuff. It is a mixture of demographics. It's a mixture of government debt. It's a mixture of political inability to do anything meaningful. Let's face it, there's a lot of noise out of Washington, but how many of their decisions are meaningful for the future of the country? Mostly values-based, but not meaningful decisions for our country. And it's in the, like I said, the demographics and the monetary policy. Anyway, Connor will be on after this break. Folks, this is going to be very interesting and compelling. And like I said, Connor's good. Real quick, before we go to break, this is the last time to promote you going out and buying the book called The Author versus the Editor Dilemma. We will record that show in the coming week, and it will be broadcast the week after that. The author is Brandon Smith, and it was in a short amount of time that I heard several people refer to this book, and I thought I'm going to try to get the author on the show. He agreed, and we're going to have him on the show, as well as a couple of other people who are utilizing the book. I got an email just this morning from somebody who has bought the book and is plowing through it and hope to be ready. I want you to be one of those people. All right. Let's gear up for Connor Lokar, folks. It's going to be a good one. Turn the radio up. Turn your podcast up. Pay close attention. Connor's very tight with his content, and I'm going to try to drive him for implications and all this kind of stuff. What are the implications of these numbers, Connor? You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be right back.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit, with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. I promised you a good show. It begins right now. On the other side of a Zoom call from me is Connor Lokar. He's been giving economic keynotes, workshops, and webinars across North America since he joined ITR Economics just over 10 years ago. With his quick wit and knack for storytelling, he successfully educates his audiences while I could read this, folks. I've seen Connor do his work several times now. It's absolutely compelling, and I'm glad to finally get him on the show. Connor, thank you so much for your time, and welcome to What's Working.
Thanks for having me on. This has been a long time coming. You and I have obviously known each other for a number of years, so this feels overdue. So I'm glad that we were able to make it happen and bring this to the listeners.
I agree. It does feel overdue, and I've been talking you up. Your background is as a trained economist. You've been with ITR Economics now for, like I said, over 10 years. You have the chops, but what I enjoy so much is your very compelling, simple, cogent overview of the economy. And that's where we should begin right now. As you and I are recording this, it's June. What's going on out there? Read the tea leaves for me, if you don't mind.
Well, I think today it certainly feels like the tea leaves are in the eye of the beholder, because I think what most of your listeners have probably realized is if they check enough different websites, they can probably find the economic outlook that they're looking for, which is always a challenge when there are so many voices saying so many different things. So our view is that things are not great, really, and that's almost in the middle. Some folks want to say the world's ending, which we would disagree with, at least for the short term. We might come back to that later. But then also some headlines and portrayal of GDP outcomes would say that everything's fine. And I think that is ultimately probably, too optimistic. When we look at most data sets, they're indicating an economy that's slowing down, an economy that is normalizing off of some elevated growth rates in 2021 and most of 2022. And now we find a consumer environment that is still dealing with high inflation, still dealing with high interest rates, dealing with depleted savings levels, seeing consumer credit utilization rising and finding themselves in a position where they're just not feeling the love in the same way that maybe they were 24, 36 months ago. So we see an economic environment here in 2024 that is challenged, but one that we think is ultimately going to get a little bit better next year. So I would I guess Goldilocks, some want to say it's too hot, some want to say it's too cold. We kind of have it in the middle, but not in a great way, I guess.
Well, one of the things I think I remember you saying when you and I were together with the Marine Leadership Alliance was that the government spending is propping it up. Do I remember that correctly?
That's certainly a component. We think it's propping up inflation as much as it is the actual economy, because we're not really seeing the government spending translate to really tremendous retail outcomes or B2B spend outcomes, but GDP, which gets a more direct input from government spending, did quite well in the second half of last year. And so far in the first half of this year, we'll see what that second quarter GDP number looks like, which we're not going to get for probably another 4 weeks. But when you look at government debt issuance right now, Cam, it's higher than it's ever been before.
Yeah.
It's higher than in 2020. It's rising. It's accelerating. The Congressional Budget Office just came out 2 weeks ago, and they had to upward revise their current year deficit expectations by a casual, $500 billion.
Oh, yeah.
What
Chump change.
almost over exactly. What's $500 billion between friends?
Right.
So yeah, we think that there's a long-term consequence to that, and that it's not going to end particularly well. But maintaining, accommodating fiscal policy and generating some money supply expansion, it can grease the skids in the short term. But I don't know how much normal people are benefiting from that. They're still looking at inflation outcomes that are north of 3%.
Yeah.
And, they're not, by and large, they don't own stocks and equities that are doing quite well to the same extent as wealthy people. They're renters by and large. They're not homeowners. So they're just seeing, they're seeing everything they don't have get more expensive, and not much of what they do have doing quite well. So
treading water and getting lower as they're treading. I came from, and I do these, perhaps you know this, but I do commentaries for one of the local radio stations, Alabama Public Radio. And this week's commentary is on the fact that last Saturday, my wife and I went to Costco and spent $700, and it was easy to do. And it was usually, to spend $700 5 years ago, it would have been 2 carts. This was 1 cart. And I'm guessing a lot of what you're talking about translate into what I saw in that check-in line at Costco.
Yeah, it's things are. I don't want to disappoint your listeners, but if they're ever hoping for that Costco receipt to look like it did 4 years ago,
yeah,
it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, ever. I mean, this is not temporary. This is the new world. Correct?
Yeah, your only hope, and my only hope, is that that $700 receipt takes longer to jump to $800 than it took to jump from 6 to 7.
That's a great point.
That's the best we can hope for going forward.
What is the cause? This is Economics 101. I hesitate to ask you this, but what's the cause of that? Break it down for me.
Well, I mean, when you look at the amount of government spending, committed in the last 3-4 years, we have a chart, and I believe I shared it with the MLA folks, there's a pretty compelling correlation between the growth rate of government spending and the growth rates of inflation. And I don't know if it would surprise folks that, if the government spends trillions of dollars that we don't have, it's going to make everything more expensive. And it's, that's why, inflation is really called the silent tax, because, any level of spending that the government needs to support, that if they don't do it via debt issuance or tax income, if they print it, they're still taking money from you. It's just in a very malicious and silent way, where it's it's at the most infinitesimal level, but every dollar that they print, the dollars in your wallet or your savings account become less valuable. And do not go as far. And it's on those margins, again, just like infinitesimal cuts that that allows that. And then of course, you also got the narratives in 2021 where supply chain dysfunction, lead time extension basically became a blank check in terms of pricing for most businesses. Everyone, because the problem with inflation, it becomes self-perpetuating, where everyone is on the receiving end of that, so then they got to cover off their costs, and then they take a little extra, and then on down the line we go. And we saw a lot of particularly with consumer products companies, if you looked at a lot of earnings calls last year, they saw that their volume sales were going down, but they were able to continue to exert price, and they were really going price over volume, and that worked for them. And we're seeing that change a little bit here in 2024, where some of these consumer product giants are seeing that they've kind of exhausted how much they can, dump onto the consumer. And they're starting to see that now they're not making up for what they're losing on volume on price. And so
some headlines I've seen recently is some of the grocers are stores, not the manufacturers, trying to reduce prices, and I think banging their own drum in order to do so, saying, hey, look at what we're trying to do. Maybe you should come to our grocery store. Have you seen those stories?
Yeah. They're fighting over consumers. And again, you're going to see consumers that, maybe they were a Whole Foods family for a while, and then they're like, all right, maybe we got to drop to Trader Joe's. Maybe they were Trader Joe's family for a while, and they find, maybe we're sprinkling in a Walmart, grocery around here. So it's, you're going to get that substitution, whether it's, products within the store or stores themselves. Consumers are, particularly with, food and beverage, like they got to eat and they got to drink.
Yeah.
It's just, where can they afford to do that?
So when we come back from break, moving into break real quick here, to talk about doom and gloom and dark clouds and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a sober view of the world. I think we should talk about after the break. So what do we do about it? What do I do about it? What do my business listeners do about it? Are there decisions they can make that they may not be aware of that you've seen in your studies, Connor, that will help them understand, all right, here's plan one. This is Inflation Environment Business 101, and we'll get into that as soon as we come back. I'm on a Zoom call with Connor Lokar. He is in New Hampshire today, Connor?
In New Hampshire, home base, yep.
Home base in New Hampshire. The man lives on the road, so it's nice to see him there. We'll be right back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston.
This is Bill Eastet. I perfected my baking recipe behind my live music stage at my little restaurant in Fairhope, Alabama. We have custom-made smokers and small batch bacon made just for you. So if you're looking for the best bacon in America that has been cured, smoked, and even serenaded by songwriters, you definitely need to try Billy's Small Batch Bacon. www.billysbacon.com.
You're listening to What's Working. We're back. I'm Cam Marston. Connor Lokar is on the other side of a Zoom call. I'm going to pick up more of his bio here. ITR's clients, ITR Economics is the firm Connor works for, meet with Connor at critical planning junctures to ensure that their strategic plans, goals, and internal initiatives are in alignment with their tailored forecasts. And that's perhaps, Connor, where we can pick this up. You, prior to the break, hey, I asked you the question, what do we do? I got a lot of business listeners, and that's who listens. That's who gravitate to this show. If you're painting this picture of it's not as good out there as, it's just not good out there, what do they do? Give me some strategies.
Sure. So, we think, at least in the short term, 2024, this is our lull in the business cycle. We're softening now. It's a challenging year. Interest rates are high. Uncertainty's high, inflation's still high. Not a lot of things going well here this year. So we think that really the balance of this decade is where we need to make hay. We think that the general external environment, the market environment, gets a little bit more cooperative in 2025. Not crazy, and I want to make sure I contextualize this. We're not anticipating 2021 type levels of growth again. I think a lot of businesses maybe inappropriately just assumed that the rates of growth that they received in 21, 22 was like, hey, this is normal for us. This is what we're going to do every year now, and then probably found themselves sorely disappointed with the last 4 to 6 quarters. So we would expect 2025 and 6 to be more like maybe a 2017-18 or a 2013-14, just normal business cycle acceleration, normal growth, manageable growth, probably less stressful growth ultimately than 21-22 was. So we think that this is a year to, take some big swings, to load up, to break from the pack. Most businesses this year, they're going to underinvest. They're going to use the election, or they're going to use any number of things to stay in the bunker for too long, and then they're going to find themselves chasing in 2025 when things start to get a little bit better again. So I want folks really looking towards the future to make sure that they can leverage maybe some of the pessimism in the market to make some intelligent decisions here in 2024 to make sure they're ready for 25, 26. Because we really think, after this year, we should get a generally clean runway of growth over the next 3 to 5 years after 2024 to round out this decade before things start to get seriously interesting as we head towards 2030.
In November, there's a big election coming up.
There is.
Do you have any thoughts that the economy will respond one way or another to whomever is elected?
I don't. I guess I do, but the ultimate conclusion is that we don't think it's going to make a huge difference, at least in the short term. So for your listeners that don't know, at ITR, we're pretty rigidly apolitical. So that's a priority for us, and we just really try to stick with the numbers. and not go for spin or bias or anything like that. And we've actually dedicated probably an embarrassing amount of resources to looking into this 4-year election cycle question in terms of like, there's got to be some relevance somewhere. And we've just really failed to find it. Looking at, average growth rates for GDP or industrial production or even capital equipment spending, you just don't see any sort of consistency there where, whether it's a red tie coming in or blue tie coming in or going out or what happens. Really, the only thing that I've found in my personal digging is that you tend to get equity market volatility in election years, particularly September, October, November. So it can be good or bad. So typically what I saw is if you get a nice pop in October leading into the election, typically then it sells back off in November. And if you get a really bad October, typically then you get a good November. And I think that's, maybe financial markets realizing that maybe they get really excited for something and it happens or it doesn't. And then they realize, well, actually not that much is going to change in the short term. So we do not think that party matters. We think that policy certainly matters. And so it's just not a productive use of resource for us to, do any sort of contingency forecasting, be like, okay, this is the Biden forecast. This is the Trump forecast. This is, we're going to wait and see. Whatever happens is going to happen. And then if we think that we're going to get any sort of policy posture change based on what happens or not, then we'll forecast accordingly. But we feel like 2025 should be a better year either way.
Either way. Yeah. So the people who are out there saying it's different this time, your reaction to them is what?
In what context? In terms of, this election?
This election's more important. It's different this time. It wasn't as important last time. There are compounding factors that make it different this time. And my opinion, and by no means do I wish to hold sway over somebody like you with your studies, it's never really all that different. I mean, the curtains are different, but the building is still the same. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I almost feel like it's the same because I feel like, I'm not as old as you and certainly as old as some of your listeners, but
stings a bit, Connor.
Sorry, for my entire voting life, every election's been the biggest election ever. And I expect that to be true going forward. So we'll have to see what happens. Again, I think that there's certainly, I think from a policy divergence standpoint, it's interesting, what we may not see, depending on what happens on any number of things. But, really one consistency that we've seen as far as our concerns long-term is that, really the most consistent theme between parties is that they spend money that we don't have and they add to the deficit. In Trump's 4 years, his deficit spending for his administration went up every single year, set all-time highs, which was then followed by Biden, who also set all-time highs. And now has us higher than ever. So it seems like the only thing that ever gets agreed upon is to continue to spend more than we bring in. And
does it frustrate you? And I know you remain apolitical, so I'm going to dance carefully around this question. That with all the policy, you study policy, you don't study politics. That no one seems to be addressing real policy significance these days. That the decisions, we've perhaps strayed from our original intent of this show, but the decisions out of Washington are arguing over curtains versus structural policy things. Does that kind of bother you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't know if we deserve better or not. I mean, apparently we don't because this is where we're at. But as voters, I mean, it's, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we want to be entertained more than we actually want coherent policy because there basically is there's no policy discussion really coming from either side at this point. It's just, again, the debt issue, it's such a known and obvious issue and no one talks about it. Like
no one talks about
this
it. You're
will
right.
blow up. And I will be fascinated to see what the commentary is at the time as far as, if anyone's going to have the audacity to say who could have seen this coming because everyone can see
everyone. Even me, I'm a liberal arts guy, and I can see this thing coming, right? So give me one number out there, Connor, some report that you're anxiously awaiting on that will paint a little bit of give you a better understanding of what's going to happen soon. So what type of things are you waiting for the data on?
As far as debt items or
No. Just the economy in general. When we see these numbers, we can make a fairly good prediction. And by the way, we got a minute and a half. A fairly good prediction about the upcoming blank. I'm curious how your practice works.
Well, I think one of the things that we're going to continue to watch closely is going to be inflation. Inflation has not cooperated so far this year. I think any general consumer knows that it's still a problem, and it's a problem for the Fed. And if we finally got, I'm putting this in air quotes, a quote unquote good inflation report for May. And it wasn't even good. It was just finally the first month in 5 that inflation did not increase month to month. So what we would like to see is some slightly more cooperative inflation outcomes as we head into the second half of this year, because that should crack open the door for the Fed to maybe cut rates once or twice.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, in terms of most relevant short-term data points, is we'd like to see, CPI creep down, maybe break below the 3% number. I mean, the Fed was all confident a year ago thinking that they were going to get this thing down to 2, and they're just
right.
But if we can get it into the high 2s, that might feel, to normal people, it'll feel the same, but Wall Street, it'll look better to them.
I had a conversation with an economist out of Tulane the couple years ago, and he said, I think the Fed's managing it really well. They're going to do it. And I thought, it's not what my buddy Connor said.
No.
Anyway, we'll be back after this break. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence, but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit, with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. I'm on a Zoom call with one of my 2 favorite economists. If you're a fan of the show, you'll remember my conversations with Peter Raschuti in the past. This is Connor Lokar. He's calling. Peter is out of New Orleans and had a lot of New Orleans flavor to him. Connor's out of New Hampshire and has a very sober New Hampshireite-like flavor to him, and is giving us the read of the tea leaves as I've asked him to do. Connor, one of the things ITR Economics is famous for, and I queued this up, I teased this when I began the show before you were on, is the world that's going to land in our laps around the year 2030. And you've talked about that a number of times at that conference where you and I attend. It's what everybody wants to hear because it's so frightening and compelling. And I'd like you to tell my listeners what that is and what the ingredients are that make up your prediction, and whether we should all start building gardens.
Absolutely. So, this will probably, I think, land particularly well with the most cynical portion of your audience, as far as, for you cynics out there, and I would think even those of you that aren't cynical, most of you have to be wondering, can we just do this forever? We being the government, and this being just spend money that we don't have, at a level that has become basically beyond, I think, most normal people's comprehension. I mean, I don't think people don't even bat an eye when you hear, deficit spending and just packages and bills in the orders of hundreds of billions of dollars of unfunded and unsupported spending. And if you looked around and thought, can we just do this? And ITR's position for a long time has been no, not forever. In the short term, yes. In the medium term, yes, but indefinitely, no. So our position is essentially that the ticking debt time bomb that everyone watches to varying degrees, or is at least, I hope, generally aware of, goes off at the end of the decade. Goes off in terms of, really an economic downturn that would make 2008, 2009, that if we only got that level of decline, we would call that a win, because we think it's going to be worse and longer than that ultimately.
So what does history show when these ticking debt time bombs go off? What does history show gets the footing back underneath the society? What does it take?
Well, what we like to think of, recessions or downturns, we would actually call this a depression, but any sort of economic downturn, you really think of as a forest fire. I mean, there's an accumulation of dead wood and carbon and refuse that gets limped along in growing economic environments, low interest rate environments, periods of economic prosperity where, even poor managers and business owners can make a living. And economic downturns generally clear that up. And we think that we're going to get one that burns pretty white hot here in the 2030s, where, businesses, and we've actually seen that slightly already this year in this mild downturn in 2024. And with higher interest rates, we've seen that bankruptcies have really ratcheted up, because I think a lot of business owners that thought, hey, when we've got forgivable PPP loans and 0% interest rates and more demand than we've ever seen before, and a stronger consumer spending growth wave than we've ever seen before, hey, this is easy. And then 2.5 years later, they realize actually it's not easy, it's not fun. So what we expect to see on the way there is going to be higher inflation and higher interest rates for the balance of this decade. The higher inflation is because the government is and will continue to spend money that we don't have, because that is, as uncomfortable as inflation is to normal people, that is actually the least uncomfortable path forward from the federal government's perspective at this point. It will also be higher interest rates because, Treasury investors, folks that are buying the $26.3 trillion in treasuries issued in the last 12 months, whether it's institutional buyers, individual buyers, non-U.S. buyers, foreign purchasers of treasuries, they will demand a higher risk premium to lend their money to the government, which is essentially what you do when you purchase a treasury. And basically the U.S. government is growing as an outright default risk. So we think that interest rates and inflation ratchet up on the way there, eventually become quite problematic. And under the surface of all this is a monumental debt and demographic and entitlement, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid issue that will also be getting worse. And we think the convergence of those factors ultimately will lead to some pain in the early to mid 2030s.
So when I teased this show in the opening segment, I talked a little bit about the demographics of the society. Our population is not at a replacement rate. We're not having enough babies. There are not enough people to do the work in the future. Give me a little bit of your insight on that, if you would, please, and how it relates to this 2030 event.
Yes, demographics are destiny in the world of economics. In the United States, we are, if you were to compare us to Germany, Japan, South Korea, China, any Western European economy, not named Germany, Germany included, we're actually in a better spot than all of those countries, but not good enough. Unfortunately, the post-World War II baby boom that happened generally globally, at least in pretty much every economy that matters for this next decade, they felt this massive swelling of their population, and then invariably Gen X thereafter was insufficiently large. In the United States, we got lucky. Millennials were really big, but we're just demographically top heavy, which means we just have a massive swath of what to this point had been the largest tax-paying and wealth-creating generation ever, pivoting into the largest government resource and transfer payment consuming generation ever. And the government got really lucky with baby boomers working longer than they historically have. Really, it's kind of sad, the best labor force participation rate age bracket performing the last several years has been ages 55 to 64, folks working longer, which helped because then they continued to pay as opposed to drawing on their Social Security, their healthcare support. But that's all, they're going to lose all of that in the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And the government, unfortunately, because of decades of delinquent decision-making at pretty much every turn, there are no coffers prepared. The coffers have been raided for a long time. So Social Security projects to be insolvent. And so basically all the tough decisions that they refuse to make, we think they start to have to make as we get to the 2030s, whether it's means testing Social Security, increasing the retirement age, increasing tax rates, whether it's corporate, whether it's payroll, whether it's state income. Everyone listening can just expect it's going to be a higher tax environment and a more challenging economic environment by the time we get there.
Lovely. I love the picture. I've said as I teased the show, he paints the clear picture. Is there any single thing, Connor, that would prevent this from happening?
Realistically, no. To prevent this from happening, I think at this point is, the only thing, and this is not me thinking that it will, but maybe AI, maybe it's everything it's been sold as and more.
How would AI solve this? That's fascinating.
It wouldn't, but if your listeners want to sleep at night, this is kind of what you tell yourselves, is that the AI, the promise of AI comes through, and it's not just sizzle, and there is some stake to it, and it turns into real life, at the macro meta level, productivity increases, breakthroughs in healthcare, deflation in the delivery of healthcare goods and services, whether it's in the diagnostics realm or whatever. And this is happening all throughout, whether it's healthcare, the private sector, the public sector, that we're getting enough productivity increases and enhancements to offset the population-based challenges and maybe relieve some pressure from some of the most acute cost areas for the U.S. government. And that maybe we manage our way through this to maybe confine it to a mild or not, maybe even not so mild recession. I don't think that will happen, but we think we're pretty firmly on this track. We've been saying this for over 10 years. Everything we thought would go bad has gone worse than we thought, more poorly than we thought it would. But so we do not think that there's any dodging this, tanker at this point. But if I had to pick something to make it not happen in a good way, that would maybe be it. If it doesn't happen in a bad way, maybe it's, because an asteroid hit and we just don't have to worry about any of
it. And with that, we'll thank Connor. And I appreciate your economic overview, Connor. You're always a delight to be with. I look forward to seeing you. I hope we'll both be invited back to the MLA in the spring and can share some of these more of this time together. You're a delight, and I'm grateful for your time. Thank you so much, Connor.
Sam, thanks for having me on. Hopefully we can make this a recurring thing, and I'll come back with an update at some unknown date in the future.
I'd love it. We'll be right back after this break. You're listening to What's Working.
I'm Joey Mason. For 4 years, my goal has been to produce the best farm-to-table products I'd ever eaten. I've done just that at our on-site USDA facility in Grand Bay, Alabama, allowing us to ship directly to your door. This is true farm-to-table. Visit us at masonhillsfarm.com to see all that we have to offer.
So this is segment 5. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, our What's Working show since its inception 7 years ago has been broken into 5 segments. Segment 1 and 5 are me talking alone about what we're going to hear in segment 1, and segment 5 is talking about what we've heard. And one of the components of this show that I have made a very important position of the show is that we don't get into politics. And I want What's Working to become a refuge from the storm on the talk radio stations where it is broadcast. Because talk radio, as I'm certain many of you listeners on talk radio right now know, is a haven for typically commentaries and talk show hosts and guests that lean right. And that's great. I want What's Working to be different in that it doesn't get into politics. However, and this is not exactly political, it bothers the daylights out of me, and there are better words to use than daylights, that our nation has significant issues on the horizon, and our political leaders refuse to talk about them, refuse to address them. And my suspicion is it's because they know they won't get elected if they bring you and me troubling news. If they point to the future with accuracy and say the way we print money and this extraordinary amount of debt and deficit spending that we go into every year is not sustainable, I'm going to go to blank Washington, your state capital, etc. And I'm going to take this on and have to make some tough decisions for all of us so that we don't go belly up in 2030. Not a one of them that I'm aware of is bold enough to say something like that because, in my opinion, politicians are unemployable other than being politicians. There are rare exceptions, but these people have generally failed so many times at their jobs that they have found a way to say whatever someone wants to hear, and they've realized that the best place for them to do that is in politics. And they continue to get reelected because they parrot back to their electorate what the electorate wants them to say. Not character, not integrity, parroting back to the electorate. And it disgusts me all the time. And after we turned the microphones off, Connor said, hey, let's get back together, suggested this, in December, and talk about how the economy has fared since the election. So if you enjoyed this conversation with Connor, we'll talk about that again in December to see what's going on. The author versus the editor dilemma. Find the book, read it, and get ready for next week's show where I'll have the author and a couple of his fans who utilize the book in their business on a regular basis. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. I am ashamed a bit and sorry for my rant, but good Lord, people, good Lord, when can we find somebody that'll step up and call it the way it really is versus the way they think people want to hear it? And with that, I've broken my cardinal rule about politics, and I hope I won't do it again. Until next week. Bye-bye, folks. Have a good week. As you likely know, this show originates as a radio show broadcast across the state of Alabama, and it continues to grow in both radio listeners and market. After it's formatted for radio, we then turn it into this podcast. Please share it with those you think would find it interesting, and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube page where you can leave messages and your thoughts and your comments, and I'll certainly get back in touch. Finally, if you're a fan of the show, please offer a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find my book called What Works on Amazon.com. In it, I highlight the top 10 ideas from the first 200 episodes of the show. Mind you, they're not the top 10 best episodes, they're the top 10 best ideas. Many times the same ideas are brought up again and again by different guests, and we dig into those ideas in such a way that they'll be easily applicable for your business. Simply go to Amazon and enter my name, and you'll find What Works as well as my other books. Chapter titles include How to Find a Niche, Innovation, Building Teams, and so forth. To learn more about the workshops and seminars I offer, go to cammarston.com. There you can view clips of my work, view workshop titles, view my reviews, case studies, customer lists. It's all there. If you'd like a free copy of one of the chapters of my book, enter your email address at the bottom of the homepage at cammarston.com. And from that site, you can email me directly. I always love to hear from you. You'll also find me on social media. Find Cam Marston on all the social media platforms, and you may need to enter the numeral 1. There's one other Cam Marston out there, and that numeral 1 distinguishes me from him from time to time. So if you're unsure if it's me or not, enter that numeral 1 after my name, and it should do the trick. On a more personal and less professional side, I record weekly commentaries that air across Alabama on Alabama Public Radio twice each day on Fridays called Keeping It Real. They've won statewide and national awards. They're simple observations on the world as it goes on around me, and they're only a few minutes long. They're a passion. You can find them on the same podcast app you're using to listen to this. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on this podcast or the radio show, reach out. I've worked hard to cultivate a specific listener, and I can tell you all about them, and I have many different options for helping you reach them. Thanks again for listening. We'll have another episode available soon.